Hey guys, John from JSP here. I want to do something a little bit different with this new video series of this Honda Prelude that we've just acquired. With the Corolla videos that we've been doing, it's kind of been documenting how to do an engine swap and how to do other things. This one's just going to be sort of more of the experience of purchasing somewhat of an abandoned project car and all the things that you go through when you purchase a car like this. Finding all of the things you didn't know about when you purchased it, having to maybe undo things that were done incorrectly, as well as working on something new. I've owned lots of Honda Civics in the past, but I've never owned a Honda Prelude. I've never owned something with an H or an F series engine in it, and so I'm sort of going to be learning along a little bit as you guys are watching. Now this 1990 Honda Prelude SI is a little bit unique. As you can see from the outside, it has quite a bit of unique features that you don't normally see on Preludes. It has an INX front end conversion. It has INX side moldings, rear bumper, and tail lights. And so it gives it a look that is quite a bit different than the standard pop-up headlight Prelude front end. Whether you like it or not, I think that it's something that definitely is going to stand out, and I'm curious to see what it looks like after I sort of do all the modifications that I want to do to it. One thing that I think is really cool about this car is that I bought it from the original owner who bought it in 1990. Now I've known him for about 20 years, and I even worked for him about 20 years ago. So I got to see him drive this thing to work every single day. So I was actually pretty familiar with the car when it became available for sale. About 2 years ago, the original engine finally failed, and he decided to, instead of replacing the engine or rebuilding the engine, he wanted to do an engine swap. So he began doing an engine swap. However, there were a lot of other things going on, and the car really was not a priority to get finished. And so after 2 years and about a half-complete engine swap, this is sort of how it ended up. I mentioned that he was the original owner and drove it to work every single day. But could you believe this thing actually has 513,000 miles? It's pretty amazing the condition that the car's in for the mileage that it has. One thing that's really common with projects like this is once you get to a point where you sort of are not working on it anymore, or you need to move the vehicle or something along those lines, the car ends up becoming sort of a storage for all of its own spare parts. And usually by the time this happens, work on the vehicle tends to slow down and even come to a stop. And that's what I'm guessing happened here, is that the project was no longer a priority, so they kind of just threw everything that was somewhat related to the vehicle inside the car for the next time that they were going to work on it. As you can see, there's sort of a lot going on in here. The dash is ripped apart, a lot of wiring hanging. That's probably going to need to be addressed. The ECU is just laying on the floor here. I was told that they kind of got the engine running, but we're having some issues, and that's where they left it. So I'm not sure if I'm going to try to get it running or not. Most likely what I'm going to do is end up pulling the engine and sort of starting the engine swap process over again. That way I don't miss anything. Part of the fun of purchasing a car that's like this is just exploring all of the random parts and discovering whether or not there's things that are missing, but also finding things that you weren't expecting. So one part of the engine swap was that this car was originally automatic, and they have done a manual conversion to it. So as you can see, there's a lot of original pieces from the automatic shifter and center console. And it will be interesting to see how much of that 5-speed conversion was done in a way that I would do it, and if it needs to be redone or not. As I start removing all the stuff from the car, I start noticing little quirks like a rear ashtray, which is something that is basically non-existent these days. The back seats are actually in pretty good shape. It's hard to see in the video here. They're a little bit faded, but there's definitely no tears or rips. Going through the stuff that's in the trunk, there's a lot of spare parts. A lot of this stuff is from the original engine. This looks like a OEM replacement distributor for the new engine. But kind of all the old stock parts looks like they were just shoved into the trunk. So we're probably just going to remove them all and see if we can find anything that's unusual in the trunk. Over the last couple of weeks, I've been researching as much as I can about these cars, and one thing that I thought was extremely unique was this air intake system that came on them factory. Unlike most other Hondas that relocate the air filter behind the passenger headlight, this actually just sort of has a 90-degree turn down for the air filter right after the throttle body, and then a plethora of random tubing that goes all over the place, most likely for the purpose of changing the sound or resonance of the intake sound of the engine. Once I got everything out of the trunk, I saw a little wire hanging down here behind this interior cover, and I wanted to take a look. What I found was sort of a jumble of wires back here. I'm not entirely sure. This is a relay that looks like it was wired or tapped into. Not sure if this is for the fuel pump or something else going on in the trunk, but I'll have to take a better look at it. So although I was told that they had kind of got the engine running but were having some issues, when the car arrived and I opened the hood and took a look at it, I quickly realized that there is a lot of things that need to be addressed before even attempting to start the engine. As far as I can tell, the engine is a US H22 out of a 1994 Prelude. It appears to be the original transmission. It does not appear that it has been rebuilt or taken apart. It looks pretty original, and I'm probably going to have to pull it apart and do a little bit of maintenance work to it. For people that have never purchased a project car in a condition like this, finding things like loose wires and just wiring harnesses routed oddly is extremely common, but can be pretty shocking to people that have never bought a car like this. I, however, have run into this many times. Usually these are the projects that you're probably going to get the best deal cost-wise on. However, they are probably going to give you the most headache when it comes to finding all the things that have to be fixed or redone. Like the position of this clutch reservoir doesn't really look factory, and the cruise control cable looks like it's been cut off, and that'll have to be addressed. There's lots of other loose things laying around, like the power steering reservoir is just laying in here. It's sort of an adventure finding all of the things that you're going to have to fix later. A lot of the things on this engine are loose, random bolts, or routed the way that I probably would not want them routed. Another thing that I notice is that this throttle cable seems to be mounted on some sort of a hose bracket, not an actual throttle cable bracket. So we'll have to figure that out as well. The wiring harness most of it is plugged in, but some things are not plugged in, like the reverse lights are not connected. The engine mount kit appears to be an innovative product. At first glance, the engine does not really seem to be sitting correctly. I did a bit of research online, and it seems like a general consensus that this is not the engine mount kit to use. I will most likely try to modify this to get it to work first, and if I'm unable to still get the engine to fit the way that I want it, then I'll probably look into other options. Feel free to throw some comments at the end of the video with suggestions on different engine mount kits or your experience with the Innovate motor mount kit. I'd be curious to hear from some of you guys if you were able to get the engine to sit correctly or not. Under first inspection, I was looking at things like inside the radiator to see if there was any buildup inside or any signs of a blown head gasket previously. Pulling the dipstick out, checking the oil on the engine. This appears to have clean, fresh oil in it, which is good. There also doesn't seem to be any burnt oil on the dipstick, which would indicate that it was run low on oil previously. Some other things I noticed is that the PCV valve for the valve cover is missing. When looking inside the valve cover itself, it appears to be extremely dry, so I'm not quite sure if when they say that they had it running, it was running for very long. Also, taking a look inside, you can see that there is a bit of oil sort of burnt onto the casting of the head, which is not bad, but sort of an indication of a higher mileage engine and maybe something that wasn't extremely well taken care of. I'm not going to dive too deep into all of the things that I've found initially. We'll save that for the following videos, but when I pulled the fuse box cover, I noticed that this power lead that seems to be most likely either from the battery cable or from the starter was just sort of laying in here. Another indicator of I'm not quite sure if it was actually running at one point. Now, this INX front end conversion was done about 15 years ago by the previous owner. I'm not super versed in what it takes to do this conversion, but at first glance, it looks like the entire front radiator support was cut off the old car, and this Japanese support was welded on. Aside from that, it looks like basically the hood and fenders are a bolt-on affair. There were some spacers that were under two of the bolts on the fenders that seemed to sort of lift it up a little bit. I'm most likely going to be removing this entire front end and repainting the engine bay anyway. So when I get it apart, I'll get a better idea of all the things that were done and if anything needs to be addressed. Overall, the outside of the car is in pretty good shape. About 15 years ago when they did the front end conversion, they also repainted the car. Now, the paint job looks to be somewhat of a single stage, but it still has a bit of shine to it. This fender, however, shows a bit of damage. I'm not quite sure how it happened, but I think it won't be a terribly difficult repair. Looking down the side of the car, again, it has these Japanese moldings on them, which are very thin and have a chrome stripe down the side of them. Now let's go underneath the car and see what it looks like from the bottom. On a project like this, when I get it up in the air, the first thing I'm going to look for is anything that seems out of place or not fitting correctly. This car has an innovative traction bar on it that looks like is finger tight installed. There's quite a bit of wiring hanging down. This looks like it's most likely for the air conditioning. This Megan Racing header seems to be tied up with a cable. It may be because it sags or something along those lines. They did tell me that there was a problem with this passenger side axle. Looks like it's not seated all the way. Also, the boot itself is torn. Not quite sure how that happened. The next thing to take a look at, since this car does have a ton of miles on it, is the condition of all of the suspension components. This car has aftermarket shocks and springs on it, but it looks like pretty much everything else is all original, and I would suspect that most of the bushings are going to need to be replaced. For as long as I can remember, this car has had these Sparco wheels on it. They're somewhat of a unique variation because they're 16-inch. Most of the ones I've seen are 15 inches. They kind of date the car a bit and most likely are not going to stay. As I continue to look under the car, the rockers seem to be in really good shape. The rear suspension seems to be intact. Doesn't look like there's been any accidents or damage on this side. Moving over to the other side, we can see that I'm guessing this muffler is all original. You guys that are really familiar with these cars could tell me if I'm right or not, but this seems like a stock muffler, not sort of like an aftermarket replacement. Looking at this curtain here, looks like this side might have taken a little bump at one point, but it doesn't seem like the frame is damaged at all. One unique thing that I found is that both of the rear fenders have been rolled on this car while the fronts have not. So I was a little curious as to why that would be something that happened. The passenger rocker also looks really good. No damage to the pinch weld, no scraping underneath the car. The ride height of the vehicle was only mildly lowered its entire life, so luckily the bottom of the car seems to be intact. Now, one thing I noticed about this Japanese front end is that it appears that it might have been in an accident before it was installed on this car, because parts of this front bumper are damaged a little bit, and it doesn't appear to have happened after the car was painted. So most likely this front end, when it was brought here, was already a little bit damaged before it was installed on the car. So I'll see what I can do to repair this front bumper. I might just leave it because it doesn't look bad from the outside, but we'll see how it fits once I get it all back together. So here's the end result of all the stuff that was removed from the vehicle. A large portion of this is just trash and junk. Some of it is OEM parts. If any of you Prelude guys are interested in any of this stuff, like the powder-coated valve cover or factory intake system, just let me know. I'm totally down to sell it or ship it to you guys. Just let me know in the comments. So after the general assessment, I wanted to give the car a little bit of a sponge bath and cleaning. before I started working on it. So I grabbed the parts that I found, put them back together, gave the car a little bit of a bath, and this is where we're going to leave the first video. The next video is going to be diving into the engine and engine fitment with the engine mount kit. Let me know what you guys think. Anything that you want me to specifically address as we're working on this car. This is going to be a major project, lots of videos, and I'm very excited to see what this thing looks like when it's completed. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time.